It is 2 o'clock, so I will call the April 15th, 2021 Waco MPO Policy Board meeting into session. Chris, has this meeting been properly posted?
Yes, sir. We've posted the agenda to the Waco MPO website in accordance to interim guidance regarding virtual public meetings on April 8th. And a possible quorum of the Waco City Council was posted on the Waco City website on April 12th.
Okay, we have a quorum. I am going to do a roll call just to make sure I have everyone. I tried to get everyone as they were coming on. So I'm going to go through the list. If I don't have you accurate, please unmute and let me know. So I have Bearfield present, Bell present, Bond present, Borderroot present. Is Bert Echterling on? Don't see him. Deidre Emerson. Kevin Evans. Scott Felton. Travis Gibson. I have Harris present, Holmes present. Is Jim Jaska on? I have Will Jones present, Meek, Ubri, Pace, Sabito, Switek, and Thomas all present. Mr. Meek, do you need to call into session Waco City Council? Do you have a quorum? You're muted if you...
Yep, sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties over here, guys. Yes, we will call a meeting of the Waco City Council today at 2:01 p.m.
Thanks, sir. Okay, the public hearing rules have not changed over the past 18 months or so during the COVID era. I'll give it just a brief summary of it for the record. Face-to-face meetings with the public are still suspended. Public comments are allowed for the MPO Policy Board meeting if registered ahead of time. Written comment cards will be read during item 2, and pre-registered speakers will be added to the meeting during item 2, or it could actually be on the specific item further down in the agenda if it has its own public hearing. Policy Board cannot respond to items that were not on the agenda. And this meeting will be available for viewing following on the City of Waco's website. That'll bring us to item 2. Chris, do we have anyone signed up to speak on any matter for this meeting, on the agenda or not on the agenda?
No, sir, we did not.
Okay. Go to item 3, approval of minutes. We have the March 18th, 2021 MPO Policy Board meeting minutes for review. Are there any changes or corrections from the board? Hearing none, those minutes will stand approved as presented. Moving on to item 4, presentation and discussion from AECOM staff regarding the recommendations from the Waco Bus Rapid Transit Design and Engineering Study. Chris, would you give us an intro into this, please?
Sure. So just to bring the policy board up to speed on where we are right now, AECOM was hired by Waco Transit to conduct a design and engineering study for a bus rapid transit service. This was what was identified as the preferred alternative in a feasibility study that was wrapped up about 3 years ago. And that feasibility study also identified a locally preferred alternative alignment for that service. And this study that's being conducted right now is intended to get us to 30% design plans, get us through the environmental review process, and to also have an honest conversation about cost and how those costs may be funded at some point in the future, recognizing that there's a fairly significant non-federal proportion to this particular project. And beginning those conversations was a goal of this study. So we had an initial kickoff with the policy board several months ago. This is the point of the study where now we have some recommendations for the consultants to present to the board, but also to identify some key decision points that need to be made from this point forward by various partners in this project, and also to discuss the next steps. Now, one of those next steps involves the route realignment study, which has been identified in our work program. There are some changes that we're proposing to the scope of work for that, and we'll cover that in the next agenda item. But at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we're going to hand this over to Paulette Vanderkamp, who will share her screen. And I believe Gavin Poindexter from AECom will be leading the presentation. So you have the floor.
Hi, thank you very much, Chris, for that introduction. As we're going on down it, Paulette, could you advance and we'll get into kind of the outline for the presentation today? Paulette, are you able to?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah. Now we can.
Okay, because I'm going to kick off the presentation here.
Great.
And then we'll get into it a little further. Gavin, you'll get into it a little bit further.
Thank you.
All right. So our agenda for today, we're going to go through our current schedule and where we're at on our project tasks and give some updates. Our last meeting with the policy board was actually back in November. So as you can well imagine, we've made quite a bit of progress on many of these tasks. I'm going to go through that on our schedule, but we're going to have Tim here to talk about route planning. Bill will cover preliminary engineering and electric buses. I'll talk about our environmental status. And then Gavin will take over to talk about all things financial. So I'm going to talk here a little bit about our schedule, our overview here in April. And again, back in November was the last time that we've met and presented in front of the policy board. Since then, I'm just going to touch on a few of the items on our schedule that have been occurring along the way. One of those was a major outreach, a virtual public meeting that was held on December the 10th. That was our second virtual public outreach for the project. We do have a third and final outreach that we're planning for probably in mid-May. We have not actually selected a date when that's going to be conducted. Like I said, many of these, I'm not going to go through them all, have been completed in the last 4 or 5 months since we've given an update. But I want to point out preliminary design. We are right in the throes of the last month or so of wrapping up our 30% design plans. Bill will get into that in a little bit more detail as well. And our environmental clearance through a categorical exclusion, which is an FTA requirement of the NEPA process. I'll get into some more detail on that, but we plan on having our concurrence from SHPO and our final determination on the project from FTA sometime towards the end of May. I'll mention, and we'll get into this also in a little bit more detail, the couple of financial workshops that have taken place. One was at the end of January, and another second workshop was held the second week of February. We also have a third one on our radar coming up. We have not set that, but we expect that to be probably in the next month or so. We'll have that on our schedule as well. So this is our overview, our route map overview that you've seen many times up on our site. I just want to point out a few things that have changed. Basically station locations, and again, Bill will get into detail on how our evaluation for station locations has been evolving. But I want to mention that Franklin Avenue was originally at 32nd Street, has now moved to 35th Street. Franklin Avenue at 25th has now moved to the intersection of 26th Street. And Franklin New Road originally was at the corner of Franklin and New Road. And now our potential station is at the corner of Waco Drive and New Road, with a potential future station at that old location at Franklin. those are basically the three main changes that we've had for station locations since our last update. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Tim. He's going to go into initially onto our route planning task update.
Great. Thank you, Paulette. So currently right now, we are working on...
Tim, I think you're on mute.
Says I am not on mute.
We can hear you. We can hear you.
We can hear you fine.
I think you're still on mute.
Everyone
Everybody
else?
can hear you, I think, except for-
Okay, so, can you go back one, Paulette? Thank you. So we're currently working on a fare collection memo, and this is to help, present to all our stakeholders and leadership and everyone involved in the decision-making process, a way to kind of evaluate some of the different BRT components. Bill's going to talk about some of the others. And so for fare collection, there's on and off board fare collection. Sound pretty simple, but they have some pretty significant impacts in terms of travel time, what they generate in terms of ridership forecasts, and then ongoing costs and upfront capital costs. So we're trying to lay that out in a very easily to digest and easy to understand in terms of basically doing a cost benefit analysis. So we can put that in front of you all, and you can help use that to inform your decision-making process. Next slide. Okay, so then also we have ridership forecasting. We're running a couple different model runs in the same kind of, along the same vein, so that we can present to you some different options. So, what you could accept with a, maybe truncated version of the alignment, what you could accept with more of the full-blown version of the BRT alignment. And then maybe one of the versions where you don't have off-board fare collection and have kind of a slightly slower version of the project, and all those have impacts on the ridership. And then that way you can look out at your forecast year and see, what does this investment get us in terms of both ridership, but also in terms of travel time savings. It's one thing to see, just that ridership number, but it's pretty impactful once you see how much time it could save a passenger every day on every trip, and you expand that over a year, and that's a lot of hours back that go back into the community and go back to saving people time so they can spend more time with their family, more time working, more time doing leisure activities, and all that really has some compounding benefits. I think that's it for route planning. I'll hand it over to Bill for, oh no, sorry, am I doing this one, Bill? For transit signal priority. So this is another thing we're evaluating and looking at currently, Waco's existing infrastructure and what would need to be done to implement transit signal priority along the corridor. I know we've mentioned this before, but just to give you an explanation, transit signal priority, in addition to off-board fare collection, puts that rapid into bus rapid transit. So it's communicating with the bus, so you can do something like say the bus is running behind. It can send a signal and maybe delay a green light to stay green a little longer, or if it's red, to give it a shortened red cycle to help get that bus back on schedule and once again make it a rapid form of transit. So we're also wrapping up that analysis right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. So some of the work that we've been doing over the past few months has been coordinating with other projects along the corridor. The US 84 project that the city is coordinating with TxDOT is moving along, and that project is near final design, I believe. And so we have just been coordinating with them, trying to make sure that we fit within the project that is already defined there. And then there's also the Franklin Avenue streetscape improvement project that is coming along. So we've been coordinating there and also finding what works for both projects. And then as Paulette mentioned, we're refining those locations of what the station, where the station should be, how that station fits in at each node, and what those stations can look like. And some of that drives costs, so we are also open to input there as far as how much improvement is invested at each station location. So we've done a topographic survey at each station location to understand the conflicts that we will have, both utility and constraints within the right-of-way, verifying that we do have that right-of-way, and looking at those places where we may need an easement for that station. So as we've done that, we've got utility impacts that we're assessing and have a report on, and then we're updating those cost estimates and trying to verify anything that we see as something that we might be able to pull back on some of those costs, because we are seeing those costs coming in higher than previously anticipated. So one of these examples that we have here is a station where we've done our survey. We've also been going through an environmental process. We're looking at historical and archaeological impacts, and ecological impacts. But one site here is here at 18th Street, and we've made some adjustments in this case. So some of these things we were leaving open, the idea of being on one side or the other of an intersection. As we see what our right-of-way constraints are, or in this case, we found that we actually had a little more right-of-way on the southwest side of the intersection. So that station has been moved. But overall, we have gotten a lot more comfortable with the footprint of these stations, what these will look like, some of the sidewalk improvements, crosswalk improvements, and anticipated utility impacts at each station location. And then as we go to the next slide, Paulette, the other considerations that we are making, because we've understood that there is a goal of going electrified with this bus fleet, although that is not currently in our cost estimate. Some of those impacts are shown here in this picture, which is actually from Minneapolis. There's some large cabinets that go along with bus charging and electrification. Over on the left of this picture is an overhead charger. So there's options that we've been looking at, whether it's overhead, which is also kind of called an on-route charger. So at the end of line, your bus could pull under that charger and have a pantograph that connects to that charger. And that is also known as a fast charger. So that can be done. It can boost the charge quite significantly in a short amount of time. Whereas another type of charger is not shown here, but is your standard plug-in charger, which is also referred to as a depot charger. So it's more of, at the end of the day, plug it in and leave it charging for an extended amount of time. In any case, we're looking at the electrical, at the existing infrastructure that would be needed at each location, whether that's at your garage or at a layover at the end of the line. Other parts that we've been going through are just these environmental reviews and NEPA updates. And Paulette, was this something that you were gonna go into a little more detail on, or did you want me to?
Yes. Thank you, Bill.
Sorry, I started too fast.
So I just want to, again, made a lot of progress on the environmental clearance, NEPA, and working with FTA and SHPO, the State Historical Preservation Office, or otherwise known as THC, the Texas Historical Commission. We initiated consultation with SHPO back in December. We were granted concurrence from SHPO on our methodology on January 29th. That allowed us to get out in the field and start doing our cultural resource field work. As of today, we do have all of our CE sections and technical reports completed. Again, if just kind of a review, the CE is kind of a spreadsheet checklist, so to speak. And then there are 3 different technical reports that are attachments to that document. So those have all been completed and in an internal review. 2 of those technical reports are cultural resource reports, one being archaeology and historical. We did get some comments back. We had sent those reports to FTA for review last week, and in advance of the CE going to FTA for review. We did get some comments and we're making adjustments to that. So we expect to have those SHPO cultural resource reports submitted to SHPO later this week or early next. They have a 30-day review time. If they take the full 30 days, we anticipate getting concurrence then in late May. At the same time, FTA will be doing their review of the CE. They have about a 2-week, I think, review turnaround time. So we'll be wrapping up both of that sent late this month and expect that also back kind of mid-May timeframe. So Gavin, I think this is where you take over. Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much, Paulette. So on the funding side, we've been hosting a series of workshops with various people to try to figure out how best to fund and finance not only the project, but the ongoing operations and maintenance of a BRT system. We're looking at both federal and non-federal funding sources that can be utilized for a BRT project. And those kind of, on the federal side, those focused on small storage, which we'll talk about a little bit more, as well as the bus and bus facilities grant program. Those are both discretionary grants that would be money that is not currently coming into the Waco area, but would be specific for this project. And then we had continued that meeting in February. Discussion, we're going to do a little bit more detail on what was there coming up. So first of all, one thing I want to make sure that people are understanding is that FTA funds projects similar to this through what they call the Capital Investment Grant Program as a small starts project. And that's a multi-year, multi-step process. The first step is project development, and that's where we're doing, where a project does their planning, their environmental review, their design, all those things. And one of the key things to start that, you need FTA's approval to go into project development. And then FTA's tracking money that is spent on the local money that's spent to advance the project counts as part of that local share. And we'll get into that a little bit later. And then as that's come along and we complete our NEPA, and that would be the environmental review. That NEPA is National Environmental Policy Act. As we're doing those reviews and advancing the design, then we will request a grant agreement from FTA, and that's where the federal funding starts to come into that for the construction of the project itself. And that's going to be as we get all of those things wrapped up. And then after we get that grant agreement, we would enter construction. Next slide, please, Paulette. One of the things that a BRT project must do in order to qualify for funding through the Small Starts program is that it cannot cost more than $300 million total, and that we cannot be requesting more than $100 million from the Small Starts program or that Capital Investment Grant program that I referenced. We need to have defined stations, traffic signal priority or other priority treatments that give transit vehicles priority over general traffic, and then short bidirectional headways. So that is, they want buses going 14 hours a day, 15 minutes in both directions. So that frequent rapid service that is kind of implied with that bus rapid transit, it's that frequency that is an important part of this in this particular grant program. Next slide, please. So some of the things that we have to demonstrate on the financial side in order to be getting those federal funds through the Small Starts program is we need to demonstrate that we have a solid financial plan to fund not only the capital portion of the project, but also the operating portion of the project. And that goes more than just the project, because FTA is looking at the entire transit agency as a whole, and they want to see that plan for a 20-year timeline. So as we're doing other bus replacements, as we're operating the rest of our system, FTA wants to have reasonable assurances that you won't be taking money from other necessary transit services in order to fund the BRT. They want to make sure that some of those communities that aren't getting this shiny new BRT are still getting the service that they need and deserve. And then, yeah, moving on to how part of the discussion as to how we would fund a BRT project, both from a capital and operating standpoint, is to take a step back and look at how Waco Transit is currently funded. So you'll see those two biggest pies right there. Those represent federal funding that is going into WTS here. The top one, that yellowish color, the 2.6 million, that is federal formula funds and things that are fairly dependable, things that Waco Transit will be getting on a year in, year out basis. That next big pie, that 2.7 million, that was CARES Act funding that was brought in specifically in response to COVID. And that is kind of there to fill the gaps as to help shore up local transit agencies' budgets. And that's kind of what you're seeing there. And then as we're going down, Waco Transit also has contracts with various entities such as schools and universities for services such as Baylor. And that's kind of just as those pies go down. The city of Waco does provide funding. In 2020, it was only 60,000. However, it is typically more than that, around 800,000 on an annual basis. It was that CARES Act money that came in and was able to replace some of those funds from the city. And that's one of the ways that FTA is trying to help shore up local governments as part of the CARES Act funding. Next slide. So on an annual operating basis, on that light color there, that's just over $8 million. That's the current budget for Waco Transit in 2020. And if we're moving into the BRT, that would be adding that 2.3 to 2.8 million on top. And that's going to depend on some of those scenarios that Tim was referencing earlier, as to where those ranges of costs are coming in. And then if we go down to and that's part of it, we have to find that extra $2 million on a reoccurring annual basis. On the potential so on the capital side of it, we're now looking at a capital cost of about $30 to $35 million for this project. And generally, as we're looking through our peer analysis, we're finding that the federal government is paying between 50 and 70% of the costs of similar projects around the country. So that leaves us with needing to identify between 11 and $17 million in local funding to help support that that project going forward. Now, the good news is that, as I mentioned earlier, some of that funding that is currently being spent can be used to match that, and so that the city has already put in 1.2 million of that 11 to 17 million for transit or for the BRT project. So that is there, and they're moving that forward. One of the things that is different than kind of the feasibility study we had a few years ago that you'll see in these numbers is that the capital costs went from 18 to 20 up to 30 to 35 million, which I know is a large increase. But one of the things that did is that allowed the annual O&M costs to come from about 3.5 to 4 million down to 2.3 to 2.8 million. So it's that investment in some of the capital infrastructure that is allowing the reduction in the annual operating costs and reoccurring systems on an ongoing reoccurring basis. So that's sort of that trade-off that we've been going through for this study. And then Bill, if you want to talk about kind of what's in those cost estimate a little bit.
Sure. So there's 28 stations along the corridor. Now that's, by stations, I'm referring to one eastbound and one westbound or inbound and outbound. So there's essentially 14 nodes along the corridor, but at one station in each direction. And we're looking at costs at the station itself, anywhere from 6 million to 9 million. Right now, we've got budgeted a 40-foot long platform on Franklin and 32-foot long elsewhere. We've divided this into segments, which we've called segments A, B, and C. So everything on Franklin and including MLK is our segment B. this is where we have the 40-foot long platforms. We've kind of done this, so it is a little bit more scalable, and we can see what the cost would be if we wanted to reduce some of the investments. But the 32-foot long does allow us to use 2 doors. So when the bus pulls in, you would have 2 doors able to be boarding and alighting at the same time. Now also on Franklin, we've kept the 12-inch raised platform. This is what we've referred to as near level boarding, so that no steps are required. It's generally a stroller can roll on without deploying a bridge plate or a ramp. And then elsewhere, we're looking at 7 inches above the pavement, which is not atypical for TxDOT, but it is not a standard for TxDOT in this region, but it is in other regions. So we felt like that was something we could strive for, so that at least this reduces the step onto the bus as much as possible. And then we do have tactile indicators along the boarding edge, and a docking strip on the raised platforms. By docking strip, that is basically, it's a polyethylene strip that allows the tires to rub without having wear on the tires, and allows that bus to pull in nice and tight. And then we've got adjacent roadway pavement, utility relocations, some of these other costs. The obvious here is a shelter, which we've cost as a high-end but pre-manufactured shelter with seating. There would be power and communication coming in for real-time signs and fare vending and other amenities. So then other non-station costs includes the vehicles. 40-foot vehicles are anticipated with compressed natural gas propulsion. Operator comfort stations, which is essentially a place for the operators to use the restroom at the ends of line. There are 2 signalized intersections, which would be recommended on this corridor. And then also, as Gavin mentioned, transit signal priority is one of those things that the FTA would require at some level, maybe not at every signalized intersection, although that's what we've budgeted right now, is for every existing signalized intersection to get transit signal priority. And then there's also sidewalk improvements at every station. And then there are some that have extended sidewalk improvements to make those obvious connections that maybe only needed a block or so of improvements. There are crosswalks at each station, and then some general signing and pavement markings. Things that any contractor would need are maintenance of traffic during construction and mobilization as well. So those totaled up to $24 to $26 million. So Gavin was going to go into some more of the options that we would have as far as cost savings go.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bill. So one of the things that as we're doing and seeing those capital costs go up is we started talking about what are some ways that we could, bring those capital costs down and start to look at what those options might be. There's really 2 primary ways that we can do that. Maybe a mix and match of those 2 options. But the first is to look at the amenities that are being provided at stations and look at maybe providing a lower level of amenities at some or all of the stations. One of the things that we could do is a standard curb height. We're looking at on Franklin doing that raised curbs that we can have near level boarding and people can get on or off the bus a little bit easier. We can do onboard fare collection that Tim had referenced a little bit earlier in the presentation. And then, and one of the things about those 2 combined, that speeds up the boarding and alighting process for a bus. And that's part of how we're getting that rapid. And it's part of how we're able to keep the O&M costs kind of where they're at. And then another thing would be real-time messaging that we have in there is, at those stations, it'll let you know when that next bus is coming so that people have that information at hand while they're waiting there. Now, the other way that we could go, if we can slide is to look at potentially doing what is known as a minimal operable segment. So that would be to focus the investments on a portion of the corridor in an initial stage, and then maybe come back in at some point in the future and try to fund an extension or that next part. And we don't know exactly where those parts could be at this point. And it could just be that stuff that's in blue, or we could go up to the stuff that's in red. It's going to depend on how much money and decisions that are made by various people as they're moving forward with those choices. Next slide. So that kind of builds us into funding scenarios and where is that money going to be coming from. And really when it comes to transit, there are two different types of funding. There's the operating funding, which is the money that's going to be needed on an annual reoccurring basis to keep the, keep the fuel in the vehicles and to keep the operators and mechanics there maintaining those vehicles. And that can come from fare revenue, general fund, sales tax, contracts for services, and advertising. That's kind of where a lot of those funds would be coming from. On the other side, there's capital. That's the one-time upfront money is going to be needed to fund this project. That again can come from a variety of different sources, including general fund, TIF districts, sales tax, again, bonding, and that bonding would likely be repaid by any of the things up above or some of the other funding sources, because that's just borrowings. We have to have a way to reasonably pay back those bonds. And then we can pull in FTA funding grants for a portion of that capital cost. And we talked about the 5309, or the small starts grant that we were talking about a little bit earlier, and the 5339, which is a bus and bus facilities discretionary grant. And I'll get into those two programs in just a few moments here. One of the things that we have to do is kind of figure out, if we do try to right size, how do we get that grant, or how do we get that funding, and what is the amount that we're going to be going for? So, we've got scenario 3, and that's kind of our full build out as to where we're at now. And then, if we could do some of those things we had talked about to lower the cost, what does that do to our local match, and how do we make that a more appealing thing as we're going down? And just so that if you go back to that, just the Franklin portion that we had talked about, the two blue lines on that map a few slides back, that's going to be right about that $10 million range. And that's from 35th to MLK, or just north of the river. I do know, and we heard from the city council, members of the city council do express concerns about not taking an improvement out a little bit further to serve some of the community and some of the jobs that are on the two ends. That is a real concern that might, if that's the route that went, that people might be losing that connection. But that's just sort of where we're at. And one of the things is, some of those funding grants, the higher your local share, the more likely you are to get funded, as FTA's got a limited amount of money and they want as many projects built as they can. Next slide. So as we're comparing those two discretionary grant programs, the small source program that I talked about before, this is a multi-year, multi-step process that includes various checks and processes with the Federal Transit Administration. The bus and bus facilities grant program is targeted for smaller dollar amount projects. As you can see, that the capital cost is up to $300 million for a small starts project. This is more in the, their grant awards tend to be in the hundreds of thousands up to 17, 18 million, with an average award of about 6 million. So they're for a little bit smaller projects. But that is also kind of where, especially if we can get the cost down just a little bit into that $20 million range, this project could fit. And that is a much simpler process, in that you apply and then it kind of goes in, and FTA makes their selection and award for a project based on the funding available that year and that application. It's not as guaranteed of a process as the small starts program, but it is an option, and you can apply for that same grant year after year until you do get funded, if that's the way that you choose to go with that funding. Next, and then kind of just as a wrap up and next steps path forward. the project is currently in the FTA Small Starts program. There is a 3-year process during which FTA looks for projects to demonstrate that they're continuing to advance the engineering, which we are, and by completing 30% design in NEPA, we shouldn't have a problem demonstrating, and that they can secure 50% of the non-CIG share of the project. So that's one thing we're just going to have to continue to work through. We've been in the project for about 16 months now, I believe. So there's another 14 months on that. So we do just kind of want to keep that moving forward and continue to identify it. And I also want to say that's 50% of the non-CIG funding. So if FTA is paying 50%, then we need to be able to demonstrate that a quarter of that funding has been identified for this project. If that, it's half of the half. And so that's why we're going to continue to identify and evaluate local funding options and ways to lower those project costs and make that a more achievable thing. And part of that is going to be done through the route realignment study that Chris had alluded to earlier in today's meeting, and that he's going to go into more detail coming up. Any questions that I can help people with, or others? Yeah.
This is Holmes. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep.
All right. I just, again, you did this, I think, a version of this presentation at council. What are the next, before I start asking too many questions, what are the next steps, or where are we right now? I'm not clear from the presentation, or what decisions are we being asked to make here today, or is this sort of an update, or are we pushing this one way or the other, or I just would like that question asked first, and the answer to that question will maybe truncate a bunch of my other questions here.
Sure. There is no action today regarding the BRT. It's meant to keep the policy board informed of progress and direction as to where we're going as we're moving forward, just so that people can start to make those plans and make some of those decisions when a decision does come in. There won't be that total surprise, and that you are being periodically updated.
Okay. I'll try to keep some of my questions here shortened then, because I have had the benefit, I guess, going through this one at a time, and I was trying to get some of the information flow I think could improve the next time we talk. But like the electric bus considerations, are those in the original cost estimates? Are those included in the 30?
Currently, we are assuming compressed natural gas buses, not electric buses. So electric.
So the electric bus consideration was that's just a slide in there talking about electric buses. It's not. We're CNG. We're going with CNG, right?
That decision has not been made at this time. Part of what we're doing is we are preparing a memo with the pros and cons and the costs of what it would be if you chose to go to electric versus CNG, so that you can make that decision based on information about electric.
But the current one on page 26 is the 24 to 26 million is CNG powered 40-foot vehicles, right? Yeah. Okay. Let me keep flipping through here. Grants, the small starts. I got to get a little more familiar with that, and I don't want to do that here at this meeting. And when you talk about the funding sources, and then you say it's going to cost an additional $2.5 million ish. How are I'm just trying to get familiar with, and maybe the next time we talk, let's have fixed versus variable costs, because I'm sure that some of this additional cost is going to be based on ridership, and if people aren't riding, it seems like some of this additional cost is variable and not fixed, or that's what I'm trying to figure out, going from 8 million to whatever we have here, 11, I guess, 10. If we can get that breakdown, and then we're almost too general to me on some of these slides, because also as you go to page 25, 28 stations, 6 to 9 million. What is that? consist of? We have all these bullet points, but I'd like to know what are the major cost contributors here, because that would give me a better idea of what sacrifice, or how can we kind of carve this thing back a little bit, or can we? Maybe it's impossible. And the same thing on that next page on non-station costs, 24 to 26. Because I don't know if the vehicles are 22 million of that, and the rest is small bits, or again, just some general. If there are even ranges, I don't care, but I want to get a lot better idea on scale on this. And I know this is a high level PowerPoint presentation, but I think you could even do that in a PowerPoint to give us a better idea of where are the places where we could sacrifice. So I do agree with, as we said in city council, as my fellow council member Bearfield said, we don't want the sacrifices to come from shortening up the route. I think we need the route to be very connective, but there's other places to save. It's just not popping out at me because I don't see any of the detail. So anyway, the next time we talk, or maybe in a different forum, I would just like to have better ideas on where the costs are born.
Gavin, will your 30% deliverable include an itemized cost estimate?
Yes, it will.
Okay.
And I don't know, we might mention that kind of an outcome from the city council update that we made last week. I think the next financial workshop would break down some of those costs that you're asking about in that session, right? Kind of, and then even with the financial committee, that was talked about during the council meeting afterwards. So
it would help me anyway. I appreciate it.
Any other questions or comments for AECom? Chris, from high level, when do we expect to hear about this again?
So there is another public process that will occur at the end of this study. After that, AECom will wrap up their work and submit a report and 30% designs to transit. And probably at that point, we'll have kind of an update status with the policy board, and hopefully at that time, we'll be about ready to kick off the route realignment study, which is the next agenda item that we're about to talk about.
Okay, and so given the schedule that was included in this, they had a month or two left, so I'm assuming sometime this summer, maybe we'll be hearing a little bit more. So last call, does anybody have anything for AECom on this item? AECom, thanks for joining us. Thanks for giving the presentation. We look forward to hearing from you in the future as you wrap up this phase of the project.
thank you.
Moving on to item 5, resolution 2021-6, adoption of amendment 2 of the fiscal year 2020-2021 Unified Planning Work Program, UPWP. Chris, please give us the presentation.
All right, just as a reminder, our work program is effectively our operating budget for fiscal years 2020 and 2021. And we have to identify how we intend to use federal planning dollars, not just those provided by the MPO, but those also used by Waco Transit. We have to identify what tasks are going to be performed and how much those tasks are going to cost. And what we're talking about today does involve the route realignment study. That study is already in our work program, but it had a scope of work that assumed that there was going to be a bus rapid transit service operating along our locally preferred alignment that was identified in the feasibility study. And then this study was the next step, which is, what do you do with the rest of Waco Transit's fixed route system to maximize the benefits of that bus rapid transit service? And of course, the goal we have is to be able to get people to their destinations much more rapidly than the current system does, and to provide a better connection for transit-dependent populations within our region to where they need to go, whether it's an employment opportunity, whether it's educational opportunity, whether it's a critical service. Now, as we noted here, just with the AECOM presentation, there is a big cost associated with a bus rapid transit service. And of course, there's a lot of conversation, rightfully so, about, okay, how do we streamline those costs so we can still accomplish the primary objective, but minimize the impact it has to local budgets, since there is a significant amount of this that's going to have to come from a non-federal source. Now, prior to getting to that decision point, we've been asked to take a look at this scope of work for the route realignment study and make a few modifications. Basically to get us an idea of whether there are other service options that perhaps also can accomplish the objectives that the BRT service was intended to accomplish, but for less cost. And so we're proposing a modification to our scope of work to include 3 different scenarios. The first scenario is identical to what we've already identified. That assumes that a bus rapid transit service is established. The second scenario is something that would operate similar to that, but it wouldn't operate as frequently. It wouldn't have as much infrastructure along the route to support that service, but yet it would still be a limited stop service. It would still operate along the locally preferred alternative alignment, and would probably be something running through the bus and bus facilities program that Gavin mentioned to you a little bit earlier. And so that gives us a little bit more flexibility. Of course, the risk is that you may have to get several installments over several different years in order to fully fund that recommendation. But this is alternative 2, because that alternative does have some implications for the other routes and how they interact with this service and where they interact with this service. And then the third alternative is something more of a baseline alternative. And this looks at, well, what if we didn't have a limited stop service along the LPA alignment and just took the existing fixed routes and realigned those? And we may still have something working along the Franklin Taylor Avenue corridor in East Waco, but it would operate identical to any other fixed route service. And so one of the things we want to be able to compare and contrast between these 3 scenarios is not obviously cost, but also ridership numbers. And we also want to see travel times. Is there a significant difference in travel times, and can we still have a significant improvement in those travel times with the various 3 scenarios? And so that is the amendment that we're proposing today. The budget, however, is not proposed to change its cost. We're still anticipating this to be a $300,000 study. Most of this would be coming from either federal planning dollars available to Waco Transit through the Section 5307 program, and the non-federal match that they would be providing for those dollars. And then the remainder would be coming from the planning dollars that the MPO receives from a combination of FTA and federal highway sources. And because this cost is not changing, this does allow us to use a streamlined public process that the policy board approved back in November when we adopted the new public participation plan. And so today, all we need to do is conduct a public hearing on this and consider action by the policy board. So I'll be happy to address any questions from the board at this time.
Thank you, Chris. And again, policy board, we're not being asked to vote or consider any of the scenarios that were presented. This is merely changing the scope of work so that the MPO can consider these scenarios. That being said, does anybody have any questions or comments for Chris before we go into public hearing? Okay, hearing none, I'll open a public hearing at 2:54 p.m. Chris, do we have anyone signed up to speak on this matter?
No, sir, we do not.
I will close the public hearing at 2:54 p.m. I will entertain a motion on resolution 2021-6 to for the second amendment to the 2020-2021 UPWP.
Motion to approve.
Who was that? I'm sorry.
Will Jones.
Hey, okay. Jones, and do I have a second?
Second, Holmes.
Thank you. Everyone, you're ready to unmute. Everybody in favor, please say aye.
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 Are there any opposed? Hearing none, that passes unanimously. We will move on to item 6, review and discussion regarding MPO work tasks proposed for consideration within the 2022 through 2023 UPWP. Chris?
All right, so as a reminder, the UPWD does serve as our operating budget, and we are at the stage of development of the next UPWP where we usually discuss proposed work tasks within that document. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to hand this over to Chelsea Schultz on our staff, who is going to lead us through this conversation.
Thanks, Chris. Let's just go ahead and skip to the next slide. So our UPWP includes tasks that we are required to do and tasks that are discretionary that we would like to accomplish within this planning timeframe or this work timeframe. So this first set of tasks are required, and these are our ongoing day-to-day activities that we do as MPO staff. We have our administrative duties, our data management and data analysis, which for this time period will include some traffic counts from TxDOT, which we get every 5 years, as well as our 2020 census data, which we expect to receive in October of this year. Also includes the work we do to keep our MTP and our TIP up to date and any amendments that are required, our performance targets that you see from us every year or every other year, as well as the transit planning activities from Waco Transit. The other set of required tasks are those that are not necessarily day-to-day, but do come up regularly. So in this case, it will include the development of our next TIP. I know we just spent the last couple of months on the current TIP, but it's every couple of years. So next thing you know, in December of 2021, it's time to start thinking about our next round of projects. And because our work program is a 2-year document toward the end of this period in fiscal year 23, we'll have to yet again start that process. One thing that comes up every 10 years is a review of our highway functional classification system. So that is something that we will be working on for 22 and 23. We have talked about potential transition to a transportation management area. We don't know yet if we will cross that threshold. We'll know spring of 22. So we will mention it in this next UPWP, but we won't assign tasks to it just yet. If we do cross that threshold, there are certain things that we will need to add. For example, a congestion management plan, a project selection process for new federal funds that we will now be eligible for, and we will have 12 months to comply with that. So it's a little premature to go ahead and add those tasks in, but we will make note of it in the new work program. And here's where we get to our discretionary tasks, things that we would like to work on and like to study. So the first bullet is what we just talked about, the route realignment study. We're simply moving that new language in to carry it over so we can continue working on it in fiscal year 22. And then there are 2 new studies that have come up several times through our previous efforts. The first one is a potential corridor study for LaSalle Avenue. This has been brought up in public involvement for our MTP as well as our active transportation plan. Basically, we're trying to take a look at the corridor. It's a 6-lane principal arterial, was originally designed to move people through the area. And as we are probably familiar with, the land use on the corridor has changed. There's a lot more residential development moving east of LaSalle and a lot more movement of pedestrians and bicyclists across and along the corridor. So there's a good opportunity to take a look at it and see how we might do some redesign or reevaluation to better meet the needs of how it's functioning now and how we think it will be functioning in the future. We also think it's time to start looking at a Waco region future vision scenario. It's essentially a scenario planning exercise that MPOs do. The last one for Waco, I believe we did that in 2007. And a lot has changed since then, particularly with the advancement of like connected and automated vehicles. So we want to think about how that technology specifically and other changes and land use changes could affect our region, how we might grow and change by our planning horizon of 2050 and how we want to grow by then. So the scenario planning exercise would look at the different trade-offs, expectations, what are some concerns with maybe the new technology and its connection with land use and travel behavior, what are some equity concerns, and how we as an MPO or as a region might want to encourage or discourage elements of those that fit with our transportation goals. And also we want to assess whether or not we are ready as a region to accommodate these technologies. And this is something that our connected and automated vehicle work group and subcommittee looked at a couple of years ago, and it's taking that conversation a step further into the scenario planning effort. Next slide. And the last discretionary task that we're proposing for the work program is to add a new full-time staff position. So this would be a public information specialist. We really do need some extra help to kind of take over the public outreach and public involvement, make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing from our public participation plan. You know, we do that currently, but it'd be nice to have someone that could focus their efforts on that. We'd also really like to have someone on staff who is fluent in Spanish, can serve as our translator for in-person meetings, as well as our required documents and our noticing. And we just need general help with our day-to-day tasks as well. So the timeline for this, if the position request is approved, would be within the next fiscal year. So the hiring process could start around October of this year, if approved. And we do have enough federal planning dollars to support this full-time position. So having said all of that, we developed this list of proposed tasks and shared this with the technical committee earlier this month. And since then, Chris has announced that he's leaving us. He'll be going to Lexington, Kentucky in June to be closer to family. And we wish him well, but we're going to miss him. So, and we do need to take another look at what we might realistically be able to accomplish you know, without Chris on board. So what we're going to need to do is think about which of those two special studies we could realistically accomplish, because, you know, for the remainder of 21 and the first part of 22, we're going to have a limited ability to take on these new discretionary tasks, and we're going to need to focus by design on those required tasks in order to meet our federal deadlines and federal requirements. So what we're going to do between now and when Chris leaves is we are working on a transition plan for the next 6 months to the end of the year, and we plan to present this to you at our next policy board meeting in May. But back to the plan, it is a major action, which is for adoption of a new plan, and that comes with a 30-day public comment period, which will start later this month in April. We will have 2 public informational meetings on May 3rd, and we plan to bring this back to you for action and a public hearing at our June policy board meeting. Does anyone have any questions or discussion, or wants to tell Chris how sad they are about him leaving?
Or how happy you are, either way.
I'll jump in here, Chris. What an honor to have been able to work with you. Thank you for serving our community well. I just think that you had a real strategic vision when it comes to planning. And, you know, it's so critical that we have an organization like this that is thoughtfully ensuring that we're wearing our 50, 75, 100-year goggles as we move forward, and also meeting the needs that are facing our community right now. So thank you for your service. What an honor to work with you. And I'm so excited for the future for you. I know that you've got great days ahead, and congratulations on your new opportunity, but know you'll be missed here in Waco.
I echo that sentiment. Whenever I first came on the MPO board, I was surprised to find out that Chris was much better than everybody said he was. And but seriously, he's been a lot of help to me understanding what we're trying to do for long-term planning and dealing with a lot of changes that's happened unexpectedly over the last several years with funding and what we can do in our area here. But thanks so much for the good foundation that you've built over the last several years, and we wish you the best.
Thank you.
Just so everyone knows, Chris does have one more meeting with us, so hold on to your Kleenex for a few more weeks. But seriously, Chris, we do appreciate everything and wish you the best going forward. A lot of the things that Chelsea brought up, there's already a need, I think, for some additional staff. Obviously, the most pressing need is going to be transitioning with Chris being gone to whoever the new person is, and City of Waco is actively working on that, who the new person will be. And then if something happens, like was mentioned as possible, us becoming a transportation management area, that means we go out of the class of a small MPO and we're up to a mid-size MPO. There's a whole lot of other requirements that have to be fulfilled that Chelsea indicated that will require even more staff. The good news is there's additional funding that comes with that designation. So all that said, we've got a lot of opportunity ahead of us. Anybody have any questions or comments for Chelsea on the presentation? There's no action on this. This was an update. As she said, there'll be a public hearing process and then coming back to us in June.
That's correct.
Okay, hearing none, we'll move on. Thank you, Chelsea. Item 7, discussion and updates from Texas Department of Transportation regarding significant highway construction within the Waco metro area. Mr. Zacka, are you on the line?
Hey, Jacob.
Howdy. The floor is yours.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, these pictures were taken roughly 3 weeks ago, so just a little bit has changed since they were taken. Here, this is the south end of the project. You can see the newly opened northbound frontage road, temporary exit. Here's where our transition over to the newly built southbound mainline pavement is taking place. So shifting to the north, you can see both directions of traffic up on the new pavement at the 1112th Street Bridge. Again, just another view of the newly constructed northbound frontage road. Work has started at the new 1112th Street overpass, and as we move into the summer, you'll see work picking up on the new intersection there. Moving to the top of the picture, the 4th, 5th Street overpass has since been demolished since this picture was taken. Along the southbound frontage road side, crews are actively working on the side street tie-ins there on the fast food restaurants. We expect the majority of those to be completed the end of this month, with 9th Street lagging behind, probably mid-May being complete in that area. Just another view directly overhead, the 1112th Street overpass. Again, you can see where crews are already in, starting on the new structure. And again, you'll start to see some work going on the west side of the new intersection. And then as the new bridge progresses, starting on the new intersection. Moving to the 4th, 5th Street area, again, a closer view of the bridge that has since been demolished. We've got our temporary exit to 4th, 5th Street. We will be looking into some options to get some additional lanes here at the intersection to help with turning movements and some of the congestion we're seeing there. At the 4th Street area, we are working with the City of Waco right now to get our last water line tie-in scheduled for mid-May. Once that's complete, we anticipate having 4th Street opened by mid-June. Again, just same area, looking different direction. You can get a view of the new temporary exit along with traffic up on the new 4th, 5th Street overpass. And this is a view directly overhead University Parks. Since this picture was taken, the old structure has been demolished. We've got both directions of traffic over on the new bridge. Contractor has picked up some of the work here on the east side along University Parks. And as the bridge work progresses, we'll start on some of this intersection work as well. Here's a view looking out over the river. since this picture's been taken, the deck is completely off the old bridge, and crews will start pulling beams off over the next few weeks. Again, just a view of the new traffic pattern over on the southbound pavement, the new University Parks 4th, 5th Street exit here at the top of the page. Again, same area, just looking to the south. Here you can see again, traffic over on the new pavement. This traffic here is the temporary on-ramp from MLK onto the new pavement. Since this was taken, we've actually paved the 4th Street area. We've got some plans to get the 4th Street Bridge reopened. The northbound frontage road will lag behind a little bit until we complete some work around Bellmead Drive. And then at that point, we'll open up the stretch of frontage road from MLK to 84. Again, just another view there at Forest. Again, this area has been paved, and we're still several weeks out on getting it reopened. Looking over the 77 overpass, since this picture was taken, traffic is no longer on the old bridge. Both directions are over here on the new southbound pavement. Crews are scheduled to come in roughly 2 weeks to start demolishing the old 77 structure. And now that traffic has been shifted, you'll start to see some more movement on both the east and west side of 77, getting the new intersection complete. And then, as I mentioned earlier, here at the top of the page, this is the last remaining leave out here at Bellmead Drive. Once that little plug is paved, we'll be able to open up the frontage road from 4th Street going to the north. Again, same area, just different direction. Again, traffic is over on this side of the page now. This is directly above 77, looking towards 84. Again, both directions are over here on the new southbound pavement. You can see the braided ramp that's now open. And here on the bottom is what's currently acting as the temporary exit ramp to 84. And again, now that this shift has happened, you'll start to see some work pick up at the intersection here at 84. All right, looking south from Barron Circle, again, back to the 84 intersection. Big change here is that traffic is no longer on the old pavement, but on this side of the barrier. Here at Barron's, we're actually in the process of demolishing this bridge as we speak. I should have it reopened. From there, crews will move on to 84 and then down to 77, as I mentioned earlier. With that, that's actually the last slide I have on the page. Again, we're still on target for a late 2022 substantial completion date. And I guess with that, I'll open it up. Are there any questions regarding the switch or any of the upcoming work on the project?
This is Josh Borderud. I was wondering, when will drivers be able to drive under the bridge at 4th Street to cross from Baylor to downtown?
That I mentioned it earlier. We've got a water line tie-in that we're working to get completed. We're working with the city of Waco to get it scheduled right now. It's tentatively scheduled for mid-May. Once it's complete, it's roughly a 4 to 5 week time frame to get drainage and pavement done there. So we're probably looking at the early June timeframe if all goes according to plan there.
Okay. And there's a turn lane off 17th that's been blocked for a few years now. It's kind of that automatic turn onto. Is that just going to continue to be blocked?
We've got some drainage modifications that have to be made there. As soon as those are complete, we'll get it open. I don't have a time frame for you right now, but I can certainly look into it and get that time frame to you.
Thanks so much.
Yep.
Any other questions for Clayton? Clayton, do you have any other projects going on besides I-35?
We got a cable barrier job on State Highway 6.
Okay. So not much, in other words. We got multiple coming up.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Clayton, thanks for your time and your report, as always.
Yes, sir.
We'll let screens switch around and hand it back to Chris for Director's Report, item 8 on the agenda.
All right, so our next meeting is Thursday, May 20th at 2 o'clock. This meeting will be in a virtual format. But there is some possible change to actually talk about for the future, although right now we are following the guidance that we're receiving regarding City of Waco boards and commission meetings. And so at the last council meeting, the discussion was that the council may go to a hybrid meeting format where the council meets in person, some limited staff, but the public would still have to participate virtually. But that probably wouldn't happen until their second meeting in May. And that boards and commissions would be sometime after that. So we're probably not looking at making a switch to a hybrid platform until May. Well, June would be the absolute earliest, but probably July is more likely scenario, possibly later, depending on what happens with the pandemic. Now for the May meeting, it will still be a virtual platform, 100% virtual platform. And we will have the folks from Texas, the Texas A&M Transportation Institute be doing a presentation on some initial recommendations they have regarding their review of the MPO process in preparation for the possibility of us transitioning to a transportation management area, as we discussed earlier. And so I think that feels like an appropriate conversation to have as you transition to a new MPO director. And as Chelsea mentioned, we will also have a staff transition plan to cover the interim period. And as Jacob mentioned, the city is working diligently on their process to find a permanent new MPO director for this position. And then, of course, we will have updates from TxDOT on their construction activities. So we have to entertain any questions or see if there are any other agenda items the policy board would like to consider during that meeting.
Any questions for Chris? Okay, thank you, Chris. Hearing no further questions, there's no further business. I will adjourn at 3:17. Mayor Meek.